Hey, 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 how's it going, Coach Val?
What's up, Dr. Tiff? It's good. How you doing?
Doing good. Saw you jamming to our intro music. It's okay. It's good.
Oh yeah, listen, I'm about ready for this summer to like just roll through here.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's my favorite part of the year is summer when it's nice and hot. Yes. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight for another great episode of Tuesday Talks. We have a fantastic topic tonight. Just like every week, we bring you something that's relevant with some good strategies as well in our episodes. So go ahead, click like on this episode, share it with a friend, a colleague, a teacher friend, maybe with your kids' teacher if you're so bold, but share it and make sure that those who could benefit will be able to because you shared it with them. So tonight's topic, we are talking about screen time in classrooms. How much is too much? So a lot of schools, as you know, have switched from textbooks. You remember the textbooks? You spent like the first couple of days in school getting your textbooks assigned to you, writing your name in the front. I remember my parents always like, make sure you check it because you don't want them to charge you for any damage done to the book if it was given to you in damaged condition. And then I spent a lot of time making book covers for my books because I was that student. But now these kids, everything's digital. Everything's on their Chromebook, iPad. It's not a lot of textbooks going on, so they're on screens a lot. What was your experience when you first entered the teaching profession as it relates to technology and screen time?
We had books. Like I remember issuing out at the very beginning. This didn't last but like a couple of years. So I came into education when all this transition was really starting to steamroll. And so they had some books. I had to issue them. And then, like, soon after that, I remember we went from each kid having a book to a class set of books. So the book does not travel with the student, it stays in the classroom for the student to have available to use. And that didn't last long either because the next thing I know, we had no books and math teachers were complaining. Our curriculum had been changed a couple of times. And so we're printing things off on paper, and admin and central office people are putting us on budget restrictions for paper usage and limited copy numbers. But y'all didn't give us any books. So how, like, what you want us to do? And then, as we know it today, there's like a Chromebook or an iPad in every kid's hand. And almost every single thing is pushed onto an online platform. And I mean, to be honest, one of the reasons they said is so that it's easily accessible for parents. So the
Mhm.
parents can see what their kids are working on whenever they get ready. I wish there were more parents to justify that reasoning.
Right.
Um, that would be great. But yeah, so at this point, it's like everything's on the Chromebook. Online games, online curriculum. If you're reading something, you're reading it off of a screen. Even the math, um, our calculators are online, digital, and the work itself is online. So we don't have to print as much paper, but at the same time, it's still a lot of screen time during the school day.
Yeah, and so if you're at school, if the school day is 6.5 hours, and most of that time is looking at digital school information, digital textbooks, digital assessments, everything's digital. Then you leave school, you come home, and now you might be watching TV. Maybe you allow your kid to play games. It's like screen time all day, basically. And so I know there are a lot of schools that are using AI and they're using these ed tech platforms to teach kids academic materials. And one of the ones that I found online is it's called the 2 hour school because they spend 2 hours of a school day, which is not a traditional 6.5 hour school day. So this is a think micro school, private school type situation where they're creating their own curriculum for their students. So these are kids whose parents are like, public school is not what I want for my kid. It's not working for my kid. Let's go try something new. So this 2-hour school that I was reading about, they teach, I'm going to use the word teach in air quotes. They teach 2 hours a day of the core curriculum. Think like reading, math, all that. And when I say teach in air quotes, I mean, I use that because they use AI platforms to teach. So think like iExcel, think Lexia, if you're familiar with those. Think of an online platform that your kid is going to log into. They're going to answer some questions, and maybe along the way, if they get something wrong, the computer teaches them the correct answer. Or shows them how they arrived at the wrong answer. So for 2 hours a day, this is what the 2-hour school does. And then with the remaining part of their day, which is about 4 hours, they are learning through unconventional methods. Some may say presentations, field trips, explorations, doing investigations. They're learning through doing and not just sitting and listening to a teacher teach them about a subject. So there are lots of schools like this out there. Self-directed learning, 2-hour schools. You have a bunch of online curriculums for kids that are homeschooled now. You can, get your kid an account and they can log in and everything's on the computer all day. And so one of the things that you and I talked about is like the impact of this, and you mentioned it, is in like their fine motor skills, their handwriting. Nobody's writing anything down anymore. You have 7th and 8th graders whose handwriting you can barely read because they're not required to do a lot of writing all day. I know my kid is using Google Docs, Google Slides, everything's in the Google Suite. So writing things down has become, I don't know, obsolete maybe?
Almost archaic. I wouldn't say obsolete, but I would use the term archaic. And the kids don't have their hands are weak when it comes to writing, like muscularly, physically weak. They cannot sustain writing for any lengthy amount of time. I know because my math students write notes pretty much every day, and extensive notes. I tell them, if I'm writing, you should definitely be writing, but then you should have more than me because you should be writing the stuff I'm saying in between what I'm writing. But there's research to back up that physically writing things down does something different neurologically, and helps the brain actually even remember things better than just simply typing something on a Word document or online, looking at it on a screen. So there's that. However, my concern, we talked about this, was the cursive, for example. We use cursive in society as a signature signifying this is me who is signing and agreeing to whatever's on this document. And when you write in print, we know that is easily replicable. So we're setting our kids up for, I'm just going to go to the extreme and say identity theft. Like they don't have these skills anymore, and they are important skills, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, because we still have things that say we need your signature on this at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, they stopped teaching cursive in schools a long, long time ago. So if you didn't have a teacher who just said, I'm going to carve out some time to focus on this, your kid might have missed it. I think you make a great point there that while our kids are learning how to navigate technology, which is great, troubleshoot problems that they might have on the computer, learning how to type, amazing. But the handwriting piece is gone. It's removed. And like you said, I know for myself, I learn and can retain the information better when I write it down versus when I am just typing it out. It's like you said, speaking to the research, like it's a direct connection between that movement and the brain. So interesting. We found a Wall Street Journal article, is titled "Screens Have Taken Over Classrooms, Even Students Have Had Enough." And what they did was they looked at students, got some student input, some teacher input, and educators were questioning whether the rapid shift towards more technology has benefited learning. What was one of the things that stood out to you, Val, in this article?
So the article had a stat that said students in grades 1 through 12 spend an average of 98 minutes on school devices during the day. It's at more than 20% of their average instructional time. I would go as far to say it is way more than that. It's probably that number just because we're doing the low grades all the way to the high grades. But as we know, the higher the kid gets as they climb through the grades, the more time they are spending on these devices.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty low number as well. I know in the article, they also mentioned 50% of teachers said their students completed at least half of their classwork on a device. And that was up from about 20% of teachers saying that before the pandemic. So according to a 2023 study, nearly 1,000 educators conducted by an education researcher at Michigan found that statistic. 50% of teachers saying that at least half of their students' classwork is done on a device. I mean, like we talked about at the top of the episode, we used to have a couple of days where you were getting textbooks issued to you, and now Chromebooks are being issued to you, and you're being asked to sign a contract and make sure that this Chromebook is returned in the same condition it was given. This is the fee for lost chargers. This is the fee for any damage to the computer. So it's been a real shift. And I think what's so important to think through is, how does your kid learn best? Some kids, like I talked about, that 2-hour school, maybe that's all they need. Maybe that's all that their mind can just take in for the day is 2 hours of highly structured, highly intense AI, ed tech generated teaching. No shade to that at all, because I've seen it work. But maybe they need that. Maybe that's how they benefit, and to stick them in a classroom where the teacher's at the front of the room for 4 hours a day, just teaching them information that they may or may not be interested in, may or may not be ready for. It seems pointless. So I feel like we don't have the time in public education to really get a good grasp on how each individual student learns. And so what we do is we just blanket everybody with the same curriculum, the same instructional delivery. Everybody just gets the same, and then we'll differentiate it a little bit. But the premise is everybody's going to get this information the same way, and we'll make adjustments here and there. But I thought it was really interesting. One of the students in this article, 14 years old, said that they like paper better than anything related to technology. The student said they're hands-on. A quote from the student, he said, "You can't learn to dissect a frog with a computer." And yes, in case you were wondering, there are education tech companies out there that have actually created virtual dissection apps. And so we're not only just taking away the fine motor, the writing aspect of it, we're also taking away the let me touch it, let me feel it, let me learn through experiencing it through my sense of touch and smell and sight. So we're taking away a lot of what we know in research over the decades has been proven to really help enhance learning when we have our kids looking at screens all day.
All day. Our brains take in sensory information. We have 5 senses. And it's better for us to use as many of those senses as possible to synthesize information, to assimilate the information, to come up with conclusions, to come up with just simply what we think. When we go into an experience, any type of experience, it could just be walking into a store or some other kind of room. We don't just look around and assess. we are listening to things, we are feeling things, touching things, we are smelling things. Like our kids, in order for them to learn the best they can, the most senses that can be addressed need to be addressed in that learning experience. And so to strip away everything except what our eyes are seeing, and then, after that, maybe what a teacher is saying, auditorily, like that's not enough. I found it interesting in that article that there, with all this uptick in technology uses, like every seemingly good thing also has a bad side that's attached to it. And there was this school, Highland Public Schools in Washington State, that like found themselves in this cyber attack. And that cyber attack shut them down for an entire month. So think about your whole school system is set up to be online, on these Chromebooks, on these iPads, and all of a sudden all that gets shut down. What do you do?
Yeah.
Like you it's possible you've gotten rid of all of your hard copy resources, and what they do for a month.
What did they do for a month? That is $1 million question, because if we put all of our eggs in the proverbial tech-based basket for learning, what happens when that technology isn't working correctly? What happens when there is a cyber attack? What happens when Wi-Fi goes down in a city? How are kids learning if we are teaching them from the onset that this Chromebook is where all of your work lies? This is where you go to learn. So that when you stick a piece of paper in front of them, or you give them a workbook, open up to this page and handwrite all of your answers, I think you're going to be in for a real eye-opening experience if they haven't had the benefit of being able to learn in that way before. So technology, it can be friend or foe, right? I mean, it can work really well for you 1 minute and then completely turn on you the next. So to base all of student learning on something that can be as fickle as technology, I think is a real challenge / problem. It's something that I don't know that school systems have really thought through to figure out what the backup plan will be. I mean, in the classroom, in your experience, did y'all talk about that in your staff meetings? What to do if the Wi-Fi goes out? What to do if there's a cyber attack? What is the backup plan to teach these kids?
Well, we did some talking, but nothing like to the extent in my experience. Okay, I'm sure there are some places that have, but in my experience, it really was, let's just hope and pray to God that all goes well. And we've had some issues, of course, with technology, but for example, there was one day I go to school, I ride by this fire truck. There was a fire on the side of the road with one of the electrical somethings. And I'm going to school. And then next thing I know, like they shut the power off because I got that thing that I rode by was like affecting it. So when they shut the power off, we're all sitting there doing nothing. Like school stopped. I was like, oh, we're just gonna wait. It's bright and sunny outside. We got plenty of windows. We can see. But the power's out. There was one other incident, same place, where I think it was the heat that time. Anyway, the students just left. Like they called their parents and to tell them to come get them to go home. And the school officials were advocating for them to call their parents and just go home. Like, I guess we can't learn today because we don't have any internet.
Yes, I think that's a real question to ask at these open houses, back to school nights, coffee with the principal, whatever. Like, what is your backup plan to when technology is not an option that's outside of our control? What is the backup plan for these kids? If they haven't already discussed that with you, parents, I would be asking the question, and teachers, if you're building principal has not already discussed this with the school, I would ask that question, because it's going to be really important to know, how is learning going to carry on? One of our previous episodes, we talked about, state testing. What happens when, the technology is impacted and state testing has challenges with being completed? What's the backup plan? So I think that's a very fair question. Another part to this article talked about a review of 24 studies published last year, and they found that college students retain more information when they take notes by hand rather than on a computer. And some research has found students have better comprehension when reading on paper rather than reading on a screen. And I think that goes back to one of our points from earlier in the episode, that mind-body connection is real. And if we're just saying, type out your answers, type out your paper, read this online, I think that there's something that's missing. And so when these college students get to the point where they're like, you know what, I just want to print this out, I want to write it out, they're telling us that there's a better way that they can learn. I think we need to listen to that. And again, I don't want to blanket everybody and say, hey, let's just everybody go back to textbooks, pencil and paper, the Trapper Keeper days. Everybody get your notebook and your number 2 pencils ready, because some kids might learn better using technology. But I do think we need to have a balance, because like we said, if they're on the computer, what some of the teachers here reported, half of their assignment time, maybe up to 98 minutes of their school day, maybe a little bit more. If they're on the computer that much and then they're coming home and watching screens, the whole day is full of screen time. And there's research to support the impact of that on the brain, on the eyes, on the whole body, when you have that much screen time as well.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to get confused. Like, we are not anti screens or using technology. As Tiffany, you stated before, like, your son goes to a non-regular school, and so you've seen a lot of different ways that can be used in order for kids to learn. So I do want to talk about like some of the pros to having this technology. And one of them was that, teachers say that it helps in assisting students, especially with like very specific needs. For example, an ESOL student, which is a student who English is their second language. And so when we get a student who is ESOL, like, communication is hard. That student could be the brightest student ever. I know, because I had one. The boy came in my class and he was just tearing the math up. Like, however, the language barrier was very difficult for us. So software that helps translate is definitely important. There are online sites that will translate every single thing on a worksheet you give them or on some PowerPoint that you give them. Making fonts different sizes or just making them different in general, because some students have dyslexia or dyscalculia. Those are real issues that technology is amazing for in helping kids learn.
Yeah, no, definitely there are some pros there. I think it's important to remember that it can also remove some barriers too, using technology. In the article, they talked about parents from a high-performing school district in an area that served a majority Latino and Black students, say that they like that students can easily access their homework from anywhere. It's on your Chromebook. You can take it with you anywhere. You don't need a backpack full of books. You don't need to remember your science textbook or your language art. It's all right there in the convenience of one device. And so
the dog can eat the paper.
Right. The dog cannot eat the homework. Removes that excuse completely. I do think it's really important, though, to remember, I don't know what the process is that schools go through before they select these different, tech-based apps to use for kids, but a lot of these educational apps claim a lot of validity and reliability in the efficacy of what they're doing and how they're teaching students this information. So if you see something, if you read about a specific app and it seems too good to be true, this article from the Wall Street Journal says it probably is. There was a researcher that found in a 2020 paper that company-backed studies produce more positive findings than independent evaluations. So they specifically called out IXL. And if you haven't experienced IXL, it has every academic subject on there by grade level. And within each grade level, every single topic, broken down into subtopics you can click on. If your child answers a question incorrectly, it will pop up with a screen that they can read through that explains what their answer was and what they need to do to arrive at the correct answer. And then it adjusts the types of questions that it's asking them going forward too. And then they get to the end and they, the stars pop on the screen or whatever, and they've completed that section. So that's IXL in a nutshell. But IXL touted to schools that using their product, the score as much as 15 to 17 percentile points higher on state exams. So if you use IXL, they were saying, our study has found that 15 to 17% of kids had higher scores on state exams, which is huge. We just talked about that, episodes before about state tests, that is directly related to how schools are ranked in a state, tied to funding as well. So if an app is saying, hey, we can boost up your state test scores, that gets the school's attention. However, there was a Johns Hopkins University Research Center report that came out, and it found that IXL had no clear effect on state math scores during the spring of 2023 in a Michigan school district. So they did a highly focused research study on a specific school district at a specific time and found that there were no clear effects on state math scores. So just be aware of who is reporting such positive, glowing data on the outcomes of student learning. Know whether it was the educational app that's funded this research study, because it might be a little biased. Know if this was an independent research study that was done. There might be some pitfalls there too, but just do your homework. Just don't take things at face value. Ask questions. If your school district is using a specific app, ask questions. Look at it with your kid. Does it make sense to you? In my own personal experience with my son, you mentioned him going to a non-traditional school. He goes to a student-directed learning, and the math platform that they use, I was like, this is no good. I absolutely hate it. I looked into it myself. We've talked on here many, many times about my math skills, and I was like, yeah, this is a no. In my opinion, for my kid, he cannot learn math through an ed tech app. There's no one there to actually talk him through his thinking, to ask him thought-provoking questions. And I found him just clicking through stuff. And that's not going to give him the deep learning that I want him to have. So do a little digging yourself as a parent, and then go talk to the school. I went and I said, yeah, this is a no-go. This is something else that I found, and I want him to use this. Now, do you have that much authority walking into a school to say that? No, but you need to come with some data of your own to say, hey, my kid has stayed stagnant in his math performance, language arts performance, whatever. And so what can we do to help this? And the way that I've seen this app being used, he's not using it to learn as much as I think he could. What is an alternative? And have that discussion. Don't be afraid to do that.
Absolutely not. I think sometimes schools don't do the best job of being inviting for parents to advocate for their kids. Like, we say it, it may be in print, but when parents actually get there, a lot of times I've gotten feedback from parents that it was not a comfortable situation. They did not feel at ease. And, all parents are not like Dr. Tiffany, because Dr. Tiffany she don't play, and she doesn't care when it comes to her child. Like, and those are all great things, but every parent is not like that. And so I think, yes, parents, at some point you do have to just get a certain level of boldness and go and advocate for your child, because nobody else will.
That's
For your
right. And
child.
it doesn't have to be rude or aggressive. And if you don't know what to say, start by sharing what you have observed with your own kid. I noticed they're struggling with this. I noticed that this has been helpful for them. What can we do at school to help? That's the most basic way to enter that conversation. Start with what you have noticed about your own kid. They spend a lot of time at school, they spend a lot of time on these screens, but you are their first parent and you will know their habits and things that help them more than anybody else. So tap into that as a parent. I'm always an advocate for that. We'll drop the link to the Wall Street Journal article in the chat if you want to check that out. It was a really, really great article. We talked about some of the things in there, but really think about how much time your kids spending on the screen. Count up the time at school and at home and see if you're okay with that. And if you're not, then maybe think up some ways to make some adjustments. As always, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.